Good evening. Welcome to the Bennington Tonight Show. My guests tonight are Luke Snelling and Annette Smith, and I'm going to let Luke introduce himself, and I'm going to let Annette introduce herself. Go ahead, Luke.
Thank you. I'm Luke Snelling from Energize Vermont. We're a nonprofit organization that advocates for renewable energy in the state of Vermont that's in harmony with the well-being of the people and our natural resources.
And I'm Annette Smith with Vermonters for a Clean Environment, and we work to hold corporations accountable and to raise the voices of Vermonters.
And also, Annette and I are affiliated from a long time ago. I was part of Annette's first go-round with getting the organization going. What we want to talk about tonight is energy, and Luke is going to talk a little bit about wind power, what he feels is the negative for Vermont. Annette's going to talk a little bit about it too. You got some stuff at Deerfield you want to talk about. We're going to show some clips. I don't know exactly when Dan, our producer, is going to, our director is going to put them in, so it's kind of a free-for-all here, but I think you'll enjoy it. So, Luke, tell me, what's your opinion about wind power in Vermont?
The struggle with wind power in Vermont is almost by definition the wind resource in our state is on our high elevation ridgelines. So that's the places that we see a lot of and that are also home to some of our highest quality water and our highest quality habitats for wildlife. So to build utility scale wind in the state of Vermont means massive disruption in those places. It really requires a substantial amount of construction. Construction, almost unlike most other projects we've seen in the state, it's really truly at a scale that it would amaze the average Vermonter. These turbines that they're putting up throughout the state at this point in time are 470 feet tall. They're putting them up often in a row of upwards of 20, like they did up in Lowell. And you're looking at many miles of impact, and in some cases upwards of 10 miles of impact from building these projects. So you really are having a profound amount of disturbance for what is power that is ultimately intermittent, isn't as valuable as some of the base load sources in terms of its ability to be integrated in the grid, and ultimately is sacrificing much of what we really truly value in the state.
And at your version of what Luke just said.
Well, from Vermonters for a Clean Environment's perspective, we are concerned and working with the people who live around these mountains. We've already seen 3 big wind projects developed in Vermont. Georgia Mountain has 4 big wind turbines, Sheffield has 16, and Lowell has 21. And then in the northern part of Massachusetts, just over the border here, there is the Hoosac Wind Project just outside of North Adams. And so we've met with those neighbors too. And what we're finding is that the lives of people are being destroyed. The noise that comes from these is way, way more disruptive at lower decibel levels than has been admitted by the wind industry. So we have a basic problem where the wind industry is denying the problems, and the people who are being affected can't believe what they're being exposed to. And it creates health issues. It wakes people up at night, disrupts their sleep. We're hearing reports of headaches, dizziness, nausea. So the noise is going out in these projects. We've been receiving complaints easily 2.5 miles from all of them. And
Now, what kind of noise are you talking about? Because I've never been close enough to one. I don't even know if I've been close enough to see one. Actually, I see them in pictures on TV. But
and this is a good question, because a lot of people say, well, I went by them and I didn't hear anything. So the noise has unique characteristics, very different from train, transportation, airport noise. There's the audible decibel noise, which is more annoying to people at lower levels than traffic noise. Then there's the low frequency noise, which is audible but very low frequency. Think about a kid driving by with a boombox and you feel it. And then there's the infrasound, which you don't hear, but it gets into your body. So think about these pinwheels turning, dum, 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 there's a whoosh that goes as the blade passes the base. And then people have described the sounds in their communities like a jet plane that never lands, like a truck that's stuck in the mud that just never gets out of the mud. Sneakers in the dryer is another one. So it's a little bit like Chinese water torture, and it vibrates into your body too. So people have described being awakened at night with panic attacks, heart racing, can't get back to sleep. It's a very, very serious problem, and one that I think ultimately will limit any more wind development in Vermont.
Well, the other thing that we've talked about just before the show started, we touching on one of my issues with wind is, for all the sacrifice that people make to the ridge lines and to the homes and everything you guys were just talking about, the benefit really isn't for those people. They don't really see that much benefit at all, if any at all. I mean, they still sell that to the grid, then we're susceptible to paying the high rate of electricity that we are with the new deal that they just made. They didn't give us the 21 million back, and now my bill has gone up, and everybody I've talked to in this area, it's gone up not just $2 or $3, it's gone up $10, $15, $20 a month.
Right, and there are issues with integrating the wind into the grid that were not foreseen, so the projects are being curtailed. So for instance, the Green Mountain Power Project was promised to be operating at 35% capacity factor, and it's operating about 18%. That's a direct hit on your rates.
And I'd add that project ended up having to spend $11 million on a device to integrate it successfully with the grid. So that's a purchase that is passed on to ratepayers. So the overall expense is, yeah, it is expensive electricity, but even more so, that project, any of the cost impacts from that project go straight to our bills.
What I don't find the common sense part of wind for Vermont is what we all talk about, what we just said, but if I'm not against wind somewhere where it makes sense across the country. Kennedy blocked the wind out in the ocean, which I thought was pretty stupid, probably 7 or 8 years ago, 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago.
That's the Cape Wind project. That's still waiting to get.
It's still waiting, but I thought, if anything, that made sense because there's always wind out in the ocean. I've been out in the ocean many times, and that didn't bother me. But when I started to see them come into Vermont, it just didn't make sense. I would like to see more across the country, but especially in Vermont, where we're a small state, why we don't promote solar. Just even if somebody wanted a tax break from the feds or the state to put a small solar panel on their house just to do their hot water. I know that I spend probably use about a tank or maybe a tank and a half a year because my hot water comes off my oil, and at $4 a gallon, that's a lot of money a year. If I could save that, if there was an electric thing that just did the hot water and maybe a few lights or your computer or TV, and that would be savings to the consumer.
Well, and what's happening with the grid is an explosion of solar development, which really is reducing the need for more power in other ways. People are really investing, and Luke will talk a little later about the program that his organization has come up with. You know, I've lived off the grid with solar for 25 years in Vermont. It works really well.
Tell a little bit about that, then have Luke pick up what you just said. Talk about, because I know me and you know each other, and it was always amazed me how you, in your Bill, live, and your dogs and your animals and your...
Yeah, well, I have an off-grid home, but it runs on AC power. I have my cappuccino in the morning, you know, do laundry, I have a vacuum cleaner. It's a normal household. I have LED lights instead of compact fluorescence or instead of the regular incandescents. And I have a very low carbon footprint. It's not suffering, it's not sacrifice, and I'm not a rich person.
And you don't have an electric bill.
I don't have an electric bill.
But you have a computer, refrigerator.
Oh my God! I often have 2 computers running and a TV set and a satellite dish.
Your phone, you got your regular.
It's a normal household. Printers. So it's something that I'm really pleased to see more and more people embracing. And I actually think that where we're headed is more people going off grid, because the grid is at some point going to become necessary for the big users. But for homeowners, all we need is one little thing to replace what I have right now in terms of the generator and the battery. You get something that can generate electricity in your home, like a Bloom box, which can run off of biofuels, and then it's a whole new game. And the price of solar has come so far down that it is now affordable, and the efficiency is much, much better.
And as what I profess is, if the government, again, state, federal, or even if the local government could do it, town-wise, if you promoted more and more people got into it, the industry would pick up like cell phones did compared to the car phones when I first started out.
Oh, it's happened. I mean, it's
already
happened.
It's happening in a big way in this state.
And the Chinese, the idiots that are now doing the Snowden deal that we just talked about, they had a thing on special the other day where they're getting into it even bigger, and they're making them smaller, they're making them more effective. I don't know anything about it, but they showed the difference.
So we're seeing a lot of innovations with solar. Probably in 5 years we may be looking at different technologies than we have the silicon panels, as opposed to wind, where really all we've got is this three-bladed thing that they've scaled up from very small, and by scaling it up, created enormous problems in deploying it in populated areas.
Do we want to show that film you were talking about?
Yeah, why don't we talk about Deerfield?
Yeah, talk about Deerfield for a minute.
and-
Well, we put that up there. I'd point out, and you made a good point earlier, Mike, about the wind resource in the state of Vermont. There really isn't that much wind in the state of Vermont. It's about middle of the way through the 50 states. These projects are claimed to get something like a 35% efficiency rating, like Lowell. Really, they've all topped out in the mid-20s.
Low to mid-20s.
Low to
yeah.
mid-20s in most cases.
23%.
When you look at a place like the Midwest, where projects are regularly getting in the mid-40s. So the wind resource really isn't here in the state.
So what we're seeing right now is images taken inside the George D. Aiken Wilderness, which is in Bennington County. It's not too far from where we are right now. And it is also less than a mile and a half from the ridge lines proposed and permitted already by the U.S. Forest Service. So those are the Searsburg turbines. Now they're 197 feet tall. And the U.S. Forest Service and the Public Service Board have approved turbines 400 feet tall. And these ridge lines are visible, very visible, from inside the wilderness. And so the whole character of the wilderness is at issue here. Now, why is a small organization like Vermonters for a Clean Environment suing the federal government over this project? Primarily, it's about protecting the wilderness. Because if you can put 410-foot tall wind turbines on those ridge lines that are visible from many, many, many locations, including in the interior of the wilderness, then you can put them next to any wilderness anywhere. And then what does that mean for our wilderness? So, you know, this is the sort of thing, this is the Groton Wind Project in New Hampshire. This is an Iberdrola project, and you see the ridge lines there. The turbines are visible for quite a distance. That's the Lowell project, 4.5 miles away. And so the issues that we are in federal court over have to do with the aesthetic evaluation that was done, which was done by Iberdrola's expert in the U.S. Forest Service process, the acoustic and noise issues, which were also done by Iberdrola's expert, who was the expert in the Public Service Board process. And there's a very strong record of a serious conflict of interest, where even the subcontractor for the Forest Service, EDR, their point person turns out to have been an expert for the Groton, New Hampshire wind project during the time he claimed he was an independent contractor for the Forest Service on the Deerfield wind project. So the issues there are substantive. They also involve the minimization of the impacts to bats and failure to provide an analysis of the blasting issues. If anybody has not been in the Aiken Wilderness, it is a high elevation wetlands complex that has, it's about 5,000 acres. It's one of the smallest wildernesses in the country. George D. Aiken was a strong preservationist, and it's named for him. Those turbines are hardly visible at all from inside the wilderness. But you put 410-foot tall machines up on that ridgeline, and you are changing the character of the wilderness, and the noise will extend into the heart of the wilderness. And so it's really been quite surprising to see the Forest Service and the Public Service Board approve it, despite the opposition. The Agency of Natural Resources in Vermont opposed this project because the mountains on top where they want to put these turbines are just loaded with beech trees. It's critical bear habitat. And so ANR opposed it. It was a split decision by the board, 2-1, and it was approved. And then the Forest Service also approved it. And so we are in federal court appealing the special use permit. And so that case has been stayed while Iberdrola has proposed to use even taller turbines on those ridgelines.
We have a blank, there we go, we're back. Okay, we're back. I didn't know if we were back or not.
Yeah.
Well, I agree with you folks. I mean, I'm not a tree hugger. I like trees, but I don't hug them all the time. But I just don't, I'm common sense, and it just doesn't seem like it makes common sense to put these things on
Well,
the
now we
ridge
have
lines of
another
Vermont.
video of the Lowell project. Maybe we should show that, because that'll show the kind of impacts that we're seeing on these ridge lines that have really taken aback many of the people who have worked all their careers in Vermont, the state naturalist, wildlife biologists are really quite floored by what has happened to our mountains, with really doing it for political and policy reasons, but in a way that really throws out all our environmental protections.
It's really not saving, what I talked to earlier, it's really not saving the consumer any money at all, is it? I mean,
Well, there's no money savings at
No.
all.
Oh,
if anything, it's
Loss.
a substantial loss. Yeah. Well, you know, in terms of the Lowell Wind Project, this is a project that's 21 460-foot wind turbines spread out across 3.2 miles and almost in a straight line across the ridgeline. The project itself cost about 150.
is that the project right there?
Right
was
there,
it?
Yep.
yeah.
The project itself cost about $150 million to build. It involved massive explosives to cut and fill away at the existing ridgeline, to build the access road and to build these turbine bases. These turbine bases like that one there didn't exist before the project was to be constructed.
See, it's a very narrow ridgeline.
They also had to do several. I think the access road is 3 or 4 miles.
Two and a half.
2.5. The total disturbed area is somewhere within that 7-mile range. And this is I would encourage anybody that has an opportunity to go to the site either on a GMP-led tour or there's another group that leads tours up there to go and look at the site, because the average Vermonter was blown away by the size of these things. For folks around Bennington, these are bigger, substantially bigger than the Bennington Monument. So this is just a scale of
It's the
industry
access
that
road.
we are just not used to in this state. And as being the Green Mountain state, it's very foreign to us.
And Governor Shumlin is for these projects.
Very much so. Now, some of these areas are above 2,500 feet, and through Act 250, we've really had prohibitions against building above 2,500 feet. The Deerfield ridgelines are up around 3,000 feet, and those are the areas that it was well settled through Act 250 in the 80s that we would not develop those areas. And so when I say we've kind of thrown out the environmental laws, I sit in shock that we have permitted filling Class A1 headwaters, that we have permitted filling hundreds of feet of Class A1 headwaters on the Lowell Mountains. That's nothing that we have ever even considered. They probably use more than 1 million pounds of explosives on that mountain.
So you said it's $150 million. How many homes could we have put solar into for $150 million in Vermont?
I don't know if there's a way to do a direct comparison there, just because it's apples to oranges in terms of the technology.
Well, it is and it isn't, but it's still
a lot.
$150
And I would have
million.
absolutely supported a project that gave the opportunity to have solar on more
And if you
homes.
started that ball rolling with solar, it would have made it more affordable, more
absolutely.
better, and created
And
jobs
for everybody. We're doing this at the same time that we're seeing the prices of solar for homeowners and others have dropped more than half in the last couple of years, in the last handful of years. So the cost of solar is going to cost about the same as it does to pay your rates as they exist today in a couple of years. And with the current subsidies that you can get, that's where it is today.
So we've seen $1 billion spent on big wind development in the New England states. That's a lot of money to create 750 megawatts of nameplate capacity that's actually operating at about 23% of that. So it's incredibly expensive, the amount of money that has been spent to get, 200 or 300 megawatts that is still intermittent. So one of the things I've looked at for the last 4 years since I've started working on this is, are we saving the planet, right? Are these reducing greenhouse gas emissions? And that's been a very interesting research project, because initially we heard, well, for every megawatt of wind, there's a megawatt of fossil fuel that's not being burned somewhere. Well, it turns out that's not true. And to enable the grid to take care of the wind, you need to have what are called ramping plants. You need natural gas plants that will ramp efficiently. We don't have any of those in the New England grid, and the most efficient natural gas plant we have runs inefficiently. So think about your car in traffic. It runs very inefficiently as opposed to just being wide open on the highway. So the question of whether or not there are fuel savings, the question of whether or not these are making any difference at all, they could be actually increasing greenhouse gas emissions.
Well, there's not fuel savings if you think of what it would cost an individual or a contractor to come to somebody's house and put a solar panel on than it is to do
Well,
this.
and so with solar, the sun shines when we have hot days, when we need the more electricity for people's air conditioners.
Yeah, the solar resource in the state is about 600 times greater than the wind resource, mostly because the sun shines across the whole state. You know, you don't need to do it on a high elevation. You can do it anywhere with a good southern exposure. So there's just so much. We could put solar panels on car parks. We could put them on big box stores. We could put them on, you know, every business, every home.
Heavens forbid, big box stores?
Let's put them to work.
What did you say?
As long as they're here, let's put them to work. No,
Jeez,
I'm serious.
Johnson Control,
No,
my
right.
pet thing we're talking
Yeah,
about.
any big building, any roof that we can do it on.
Or your individual home.
Or your individual home. Yeah, there's just so much opportunity that really, even if folks are concerned about aesthetics, you can do it in a way that really limits the impacts and generates renewable energy without such drastic impacts like this wind.
And if you did it on your home, you get the direct savings.
That's correct.
The homeowner, the consumer, right there. You don't have to pay Green Mountain or...
Mike, it even gets better than that. Green Mountain Power
better than
gets
that?
better than
Come
that.
on.
Green Mountain Power is required by law to pay you an additional fee for each kilowatt hour that your project generates and puts back into the grid. So if you have a project on your home and say that it generates 1 kilowatt hour, you normally would have paid Green Mountain Power or your utility something in the range of 14 cents for that. The law states that you have to be paid. If you generate that kilowatt hour and you send it back into the grid, you have to be paid up to 20 cents for that. So you essentially make 6 cents on the power that you generate. And it's a great law.
And is that one of the reasons that nobody out there is pushing solar like they're pushing all this other garbage?
No, I don't think. I mean, this is a law.
No, I mean, they know that the consumer is better off if they try to do their own solar
yes.
than going through all this
The
other...
problem absolutely is the status quo. I mean, you look at these utilities, it's not necessarily in their best interest to let people generate their own electricity. You know, they have essentially a monopoly as it relates to getting you power. And so
Why is the governor for all this crud then? What happened to Shumlin, the Democrat, the true Democrat that, what happened to him? I thought he wanted to keep Vermont a green place, and why is he letting all this happen or promoting it actually?
I think he's been a supporter of renewable energy. I don't think that he's looked hard enough about the impacts of the particular technologies, basically wind.
He's been invited to visit the neighbors of these projects and absolutely refused.
We invited him multiple times to the Lowell project site. He did not attend the project site with any of the people that would be impacted. In fact, he avoided our invitation to go up there. He gave the people that would be impacted less than 20 minutes, about 8 minutes in his office to discuss the details of the project and how it would impact their homes. I would say that his administration has mostly been non-responsive to the issues that are impacting real Vermonters when it comes to wind development in the state. Even
tone deaf. I mean, what we're dealing with now with some of the individuals who are impacted really is so serious with the health effects that people are experiencing. We have one family who has been told by their doctors they can't work. The mechanical noise, the wind noise has interfered with their sleep to the point where they can't concentrate. They're now afraid to drive. They live 3/4 of a mile from the Sheffield Wind Project, and First Wind, the developer, says we're in compliance, so there's no problem, and the Shumlin administration is not interested.
You know what I think it is that there seems to be this viewpoint that just because it's renewable, it's good, or just because it's renewable, it's green, or just because it's renewable, it's sustainable, and that's not true. The fact is you can do just as much damage with a renewable technology as you can with any other technology. So anybody that's up in arms about big box stores, as you mentioned earlier,
easy.
Or any other type of development in this state should be just as up in arms about this type of renewable energy development and ensuring that it's done right. And this administration has demonstrated, and I think this has happened throughout the country, frankly, has demonstrated that they're willing to just sort of turn their backs on ensuring that the normal rules to development apply to these technologies because they want to accelerate a response to climate change and they want to show some sort of flashiness to voters, but they don't really want to pay attention to the fine details of whether it's actually impacting Vermonters and whether it's actually good for us from a carbon footprint point of view.
Well, you bring up the comparison to big box stores, and even big box stores have their place in somebody's town. They have a place to be there in a central commercial district or whatever you want. This doesn't make sense because they're eating up ridge lines, and like you just showed the film, they're eating up
important. And we
Important.
don't have that many,
No.
that they're critical habitat for the wildlife, for the
gain
water.
what? When we
yeah.
can get it through in making it available for every homeowner to at least have some sort of solar, small or big, what if they want to do their own home, and we're not even doing that. It's
So-
just-
why
the
do
kicker,
we-
Mike, is that these projects, a big box store comes with jobs. You know, you have to have people there to
You get a
work it,
benefit
right?
in
You
taxes
get some
and-
benefit.
yeah, yeah.
These big projects, one, takes tax dollars in the form of subsidies. Two, the number of long-term, full-time jobs at the Lowell wind site for the length of the project, the length of its whole life, over 20 years, is 5.
5.
They had 200 people working on the project at one time up there, but now that the project is completed, they've created 5 jobs. There's a dog sledding retreat and inn just south of the project in Eden Mills. That place employs about that same number of people. If that place were to go out of business as a result of the impact of the noise of this project, there would be a net negative of jobs in the area.
His
We have-
business was off 50% this year.
We have 60,000 jobs in this state tied to tourism. People come to this state and spend about $1.6 billion on things when they're here in this state. If people don't want to come back to the Green Mountain State because we've lined our state up, and we don't know, there's been no studies on this, but if they take offense to the noise or they take offense to the way these things look, we're sacrificing many more jobs than we could possibly create with them.
Can we get any kind of a moratorium on building these things until we see the effect?
Well,
Is there
actually,
anything-
Bennington County Senator Hartwell was one of the leaders of an effort to get a moratorium. One of the problems that we are seeing now is that why do 70 or 60, whatever the percent is, of Vermonters polled say they support industrial wind development even on the ridgelines? And when you actually drill down into those polls and look at the demographics, there's heavily Chittenden County that really is leading that choice, and then other areas, say Brattleboro, other areas that aren't impacted. So you have the areas that will never see a wind project or that will never be impacted in a major way, supporting them on the backs of the rural residents who are having to bear the burden. So, for instance, Burlington Electric is buying all the power from the Georgia Mountain Project. They were negotiating to buy power from the Grandpa's Knob Project in Rutland County. They are buying power from the Sheffield Project. So they are meeting their renewable energy goals, sort of, by buying power that nobody in Burlington has to bear any burden for. And so one of the challenges that we see is to try and educate and help people understand that the symbolism of seeing these, and some people consider them beautiful sculpture. I actually don't think they're a problem aesthetically. Some people do.
I don't think
but
they're good
the
looking.
size of them, I think, is totally out of scale. But this, the wind proponents have said, oh, people just don't want to look at them. Well, that's actually probably the bottom of the issue for the community. It is a combination of a corporation coming in and essentially taking over your community, and that's what happens. It divides the community. Remember, we had to deal with some of those issues when we were dealing with the natural gas power plant proposal. You hate to see Vermont communities torn apart by outside interests who come in, and they're also giving the host towns hundreds of thousands of dollars while the impacts go to surrounding towns. And there's no justice involved in these. And so I think that if Vermonters really understood that not only the environmental side, but the human side and the whole corporate structure and how much it damages our communities, I think that the more people learn in Vermont, the more they oppose they become.
I just don't understand where the Democrats are on this. And again, I'm an independent, but this is a Democratic state, and Shumlin's a Democrat.
Shumlin, Welch, Sanders, and Leahy
I don't
all
understand
support.
why they're allowing this to happen in this state. And again, I'm not against wind, where it's applicable across the country. Like we just talked about a minute ago with Kennedy stopping the one out off Hyannis. If they want to put more out in the ocean where nobody sees them, virtually nobody's affected, you got wind all the time, more wind probably than you want sometimes. I don't understand, and for Vermont, I do more solar and stuff like that, and in Arizona, you might, or some desert place, you put up solar panels. That's where I think we failed as a country, not to have a sincere energy policy. We're putting everything, whether it's the insurance thing that this state's going to go through with health insurance, why our federal government is failing us so bad. It's making every state sort of fend for themselves, it seems.
Well, I think that there's benefit for politicians to use climate change as a talking point and to say that they're standing up and fighting climate change. And I think that they haven't yet been held accountable for those decisions. And I think as we see more and more bad decisions like the Lowell Wind Project, I think we'll see more of a grassroots movement to make decisions that actually benefit the people rather than benefit the politician.
And there is a money side of it. I mean, there's campaign donations. There's who their
These
base
things
is.
are big business.
And so who's really making the money on this is investment bankers like D.E. Shaw. They're the major backers of First Wind. So
Legal firms.
Yeah, the
make
lawyers
out really
making
well.
a lot of money. So that the amount of money to be made on these projects is huge. So for the ones that get through, they really are paying off for the wealthy.
I think that's a good point. You talk about a $150 million project in the state of Vermont. You can throw some money around, and in a small state, I think that changes minds.
Well, like I said, the $150 million, if you broke it down, what does it cost for one little household to put on a solar panel? And I'm saying, not a solar panel for the whole house, maybe.
Right.
But even if it was the whole house, I remember years ago they said, and it's probably changed, $30,000. If you're building a $200,000 home, it would cost you an extra $30,000 to completely make that house energy efficient with solar.
It's about a third of that now.
Okay, a third of that now, 10,000 you're
Yeah,
saying, roughly.
roughly, depending on the
okay?
size of the house.
So take that 10,000, I'm certainly not a mathematician, and divide it into 150. God's sakes, you might have been able to do half of Vermont with solar.
You could do quite a bit.
Well, but then that gets to the financing structure. There's a lot of structure in place to fund these big wind projects, and that's one of the things that Luke's been working on with trying to figure out a financing structure for Vermonters that makes sense.
Yeah, we've done a couple of things just to really encourage Vermonters to go solar. We've launched this program called the Power Up program. And basically what we've done is we've linked Vermonters up with a group purchase, so to get almost a wholesale price on the materials through our nonprofit. And then on the other side of the ball, we've linked them up with their financing options. And
Do you have any numbers you can give now, or a website that they
Oh
can?
yeah, they can go to powerupvt.com.
Do it again.
Powerupvt.com.
Try to say it, say it at the end of the show. We should have put it on the trailer.
But powerupvt.com, and there's just a form there that folks can fill out, and we call them back and we figure out what's a good fit for them. And depending on the type of their site, their home, the type of installation that would work, it's possible to get these things financed and set up in a way that you're actually paying about the same you would have been paying for your utility bill. So we get you right in that same range where it almost doesn't cost you anything over the life of the span of the materials that you've installed there. So it ends up being a very advantageous thing for the consumer to go have this independent resource, have it be renewable, and essentially not have it cost them very much.
Well, now some of them, though, we've seen other efforts like this that involve financing so that you lease and you're leasing.
Yep. Yeah, there is a lot of lease programs out there.
But
What's
yours
nice
is an
about
ownership
this,
program?
Yep. What's really nice about this program that we've put together is it's an ownership program. You know, when you lease, there's obviously they have to make their profit too. It's similar to leasing a car. It's much more advantageous if you're going to have this on your house for 20 years, and that's about how long these things last, 20, 25 years. You really rather own it, and it becomes an asset and it adds value to your home. And so we've set this up in a way that we think is beneficial for Vermonters, that they get the most bang for the buck out of it, and it comes at the most affordable rate available to them, and they're generating their own electricity and getting the benefits of renewable electricity without supporting something like these industrial wind developments.
Well, the thing that always gets me is every time they come up with something, wind power, you thought, oh, geez, that's a great answer. And then you hear natural gas, oh, that's a great, and then you hear about fracking and what they're doing, possibility of doing to your water supply and everything else. But I've never heard anything negative or come back negative as solar. I really haven't, because if the sun doesn't shine, we're all gone anyway. So, I mean, if you can get that, harness that, and help you out energy-wise on your house, I don't see how you can lose with it.
Well, I will, in full disclosure, the manufacturing process of solar does contain some toxic chemicals, and there have been some issues with this, sites that didn't handle those well. I think that as technology comes along with some of the more exciting things that we're seeing possible, I think those issues will be reduced.
But going back to that,
but compared to wind, which
right,
these big machines have all sorts of rare.
There's nothing made today that isn't made with some
something,
kind of
right.
I get fishing reels. I bought a fishing reel, and I looked in the box. I bought one a couple of years ago. And in California, they have to put this label on it. This thing contains things that cause. And I call up the guy who I know has been in business making, repairing fishing reels for 30-something years. I said, what the hell is this? He says, I deal with them all the time. He says, no, they just have to do that because there's lead in it. I said, what do you mean lead? Well, they use it as a counter balance for the spinning of the reel. And he says, you'll never touch the lead. I said, well, why'd they have, well, California.
Because it's in there.
Right.
It's in there in California, sensitive. I mean, you're not going to eat the fishing reel. You're not going to go to, you know, that's just crazy. But we can get a little bit stupid on some of that. But if they take care of the waste the right way, if they can recycle it or they can do like you just said. I mean, in Bennington here, we're finding out we've got issues now with PCBs that they used to say never spread. Well, guess what?
They're spreading.
They're spreading.
Yeah.
So you can't worry yourself to death, but on the thing that bothers me the most is whenever you do these wind power things or anything, you're always putting money into a company, then you got to get it back. They're charging you to get the service back. With solar, once you do it, you're your own energy company.
Yes.
It's on your house.
Yep.
You deal with it.
Yep.
If you got to replace it, bang. But you don't have to write out a check every month to, well, not CVPS anymore, GMP, whatever that is. And I just think that's the way to go for Vermont. But
Well, it really is, I have to say, very liberating, not having an electric bill, not dealing with the power company, and you have really reliable power. When we're dealing with these power outages, with all these storms, my power doesn't go out.
and the misnomer about, oh, Vermont isn't a sunny state.
Vermont has
Plenty of sun.
Yeah.
30% more sunshine than Germany, which has massively deployed solar.
And Annette, you live off the grid.
I
so,
live off the grid,
You know,
yeah.
if over the course of the year, you know, with your size system, would you run? Do you ever really run out of power? And if so, could you just increase the size of the system? What is your situation?
We get about, I would say, 90 to 95% of our electricity and hot water from solar panels to different types. In the winter, the period from roughly November, December, January, that's the tough time. And so during those periods of time, when we go for days without having sunshine, then I have a generator I have to run.
Right.
And what I upgraded my system in 2008. Before doing that, I had to run the generator every day. Now, I can probably count on both hands the number of times I run the generator in the winter. So what the generator does is it charges up the batteries. So I'm not just running off the generator and running my household.
Off the batteries.
I'm running off the batteries.
Right.
So that, like right now, as the sun goes down, then if I'm watching TV, I'm drawing from the batteries. And so it is remarkably efficient in terms of just what you're capable of doing for the better part of a year.
Well, this chair I'm in, I'm sitting on 2 batteries.
Batteries, right.
That it's amazing. I can go supposedly about 20 miles round trip on this thing. Now, I've never gone that far on it. I go maybe a couple miles and back. But all you do is plug it in.
Well, and you could charge that with a solar panel in your window.
Yeah, you could
easily.
You know, you could. And it's amazing what I think the technology in this little chair someday will be bigger and better for cars and everything else. Cars more using around town. I'm not saying cars going on a big trip, but I just think that this is the way to go. But what was the next thing we wanted to talk about? How can we? Let's skip just the energy stuff now. I want to talk a little bit about, because we're going to do other shows. I'd like to get Hartwell in here maybe to talk about politics, Bob Hartwell, and maybe Dick Sears would come down and talk. I want to know what we can do in the state to get the young people like you. You're about 30, 31, something like that?
30.
30. You don't look a day older.
Thank you,
29.
I appreciate it.
I think the next generation of young Vermonters is what's going to save Vermont, to be honest with you, whether it's locally in Bennington or issues me and you have talked about the well-being of the green and the trees and everything else. How do we get them excited to get into politics and get going locally at their select boards or state representatives, you know, that type of thing?
I think that starts, Mike, with keeping them here. I think as people get into their 30s, they become more civically engaged if they're involved in the community, but to keep them here and keep them involved in their community means providing them with job opportunities, giving them a reason to stay here. I mean, it's very interesting to me personally. I've left the state and I've come back and I've gone back and forth and still do quite a bit. There's substantially more professional and career development opportunities out of the state than there are for somebody that wants to advance themselves and take on a career there isn't as much as there could be here in the state. And
But
that-
why
that's
is
the biggest
why
challenge.
isn't there? Do you have the answer, or have you heard?
I don't know
what you
that I
think
have the answer. I know I don't. You know, that's not energy is more my specialty
Right.
than economic development. But I would think that we have to look at ways at bringing in businesses to our state. I mean, we have such a high quality and standard of living. Bringing more businesses here, fostering the most sustainable development we can find, really looking at downtown economic revitalization. Those are the sort of things that we need to do more of to make sure that there's places and
Because
and
a lot of
jobs
the
for
young
our
people I
younger
hear
people.
in Vermont, in Bennington here, and even some of the later doctors and some of the professional people I know, they're leaving Vermont and they're going to New Hampshire, they're going to Maine. A couple of our good doctors have gone to Maine. I don't know if it's because of this healthcare thing. I don't know if it's just the attitude of the state. I don't know if it's the high cost of living in the state and they don't feel like they're getting their bang for their buck. But somebody ought to do some kind of forums or seminars across the state to find out how are we losing the very people that you don't want to lose.
Well, you know, I have sort of different answer to the economic development question, and part of it is comes from a presentation that we had. I serve on the Regional Planning Commission representing my town in Rutland, and we had a presentation about Pulteney 2020. You ever heard of it?
Yes,
And
I have.
So we had a presentation from a Green Mountain College professor and Jose Galvez, and talking about what they have done in Pulteney to encourage entrepreneurialism. And it's really quite exciting. Jose is a very gregarious young man, and he is able to go out and
Could we
really
get him on a
brought
show like this? Is he
everybody.
local?
You
You
should.
should, yeah.
Can we get him down?
And in fact, Thursday night at the Rutland Library, there's going to be a forum where community members are invited to come. And one of the things that people are looking at the Regional Planning Commission when they sit there and hear these presentations is, oh, can we do that for our town? And so through the community, they had a whole day long with breakout sessions. People came back with all kinds of great ideas. They chose 4 of them, but other ones are happening. And one of them is a local food restaurant, and another one is an art center, and another one has to do with recreation and trails around the town. And it's a way, you know, I think of my town, which has a downtown down on Route 7, and people living up in the valley and people on the west side, and I think, how could we ever do anything like this in my town? But in a town like Bennington, absolutely. I mean, I used to be an entrepreneur, used to make and sell products, and I think that that's one of the things that Vermont is lacking. I've lived in other states that do a better job of encouraging entrepreneurs to start their own businesses, and small business is the heart and soul of Vermont's economy. And so if we make that place and make it more of a community effort in terms of building that economic development piece, where instead of people leaving, we have incredibly talented young people, and so to encourage their skills, we have a lot of people with money who can be tapped to put up some seed money to get some people's ideas off the ground.
Well, in Bennington, I find, and me and you have done this before, we've been through this dance before, but I find there's a mental block in Bennington, because we have it all. We have the history part of it, we have a downtown, we have a North Side Drive commercial, we have industrial. But it's almost like we want this to grow, we don't want that to grow.
Well, I also remember you have often talked about the alphabet soup groups that you have here.
Yeah.
And one of the questions that came up at the Regional Planning Commission meeting was, you know, Rutland has all these different groups, the redevelopment, the downtown, and so they're factions, and how do you, and so the Rutland representative asked Jose, well, what did you do about that? And well, Jose brought them all to the table. And so it's a way of bringing people together instead of just having these factions fighting all the time.
I do think, though, when it comes to the sort of alphabet soup problem, you sort of have a lot of people in charge of a lot of things, but nobody's really in charge of picking up the phone and actually recruiting. I think you really need to have a situation where somebody is responsible for bringing businesses to the state. Somebody's job depends on them being successful in doing that. I think that's something that you know, we pay lip service to, but we haven't done a lot of. I think there's a lot that's great about Vermont, and making it a happier business climate and getting businesses to come here and employ people here, I think, is very important. We really have paid a lip service but done none of it.
Well, I think in Vermont's 2 big problems. One, Vermont has everything, but it doesn't have an ocean view. There's not much we're going to be able to do about that.
But we do have mountains.
We do have mountains.
Beautiful
but
mountains.
Vermont also, locally anyway, you can't do that because we tried it 50 years ago or something like that, and it's like, that's nonsense, you know. what didn't work before, let's try it in a new way here.
But as you
today.
point out, the young people,
Yes,
they
they
have
do.
ideas. And that's one of the interesting things that we're seeing in the Poultney effort was the young people getting involved. And that
We got two
when
young
you-
guys on our select board, and honest to God, the rest of the old farts don't even listen to them. And it's a shame. And I'm hoping in the next election, one of the young guys is up. I hope he gets reelected, and I hope, maybe if somebody doesn't run, the other will be a young person. Because I do think the youth is going to take Bennington into the next generation of mindset, mind thought.
So in this area, you might bring in the Community College of Vermont people and actually tap into the students who are Vermonters, who are, I mean,
But they come and go, though, a lot of these.
They do, but
not
still.
the community, I'm
for
sorry, the community usually stays. But
Yeah.
we've tried to reach out to the Bennington
College, they
College,
come and go. But
and-
the community college, the idea of recruiting from out of state is something that a lot of the EDCs, the Economic Development Corporations, really do try and do. Look, if a company's going to look for cheap power and the best deal, they're not going to get it in Vermont. And so I know it's frustrating for the people who do try and do recruiting. They spend a lot of time doing it, and at least I know in the Rutland region.
But it goes back to what you said about entrepreneurism. If you get somebody in Vermont that thinks of a product that can be manufactured in Vermont and kick it off that way, and again, I don't know what the product would be, but that would stay in Vermont. And I think we need to do more concentrating small businesses like you're talking about. In Bennington, we definitely need to do that. And I think it can be done. I'm not a defeatist, I'm an optimist, but you do get sick of banging your head against the wall when other people aren't effective, but yet they still have the voice, they still have the power. And
Well,
you say, well, why? You're not doing anything. Get out of the way.
With our work with Vermonters for a Clean Environment, so much of what we have ended up doing, we're not environmentalists for a clean Vermont, we're Vermonters for a clean environment. So we really do work with communities, and we've seen over and over how people becoming active and becoming involved in a landfill proposal or a wind proposal or a quarry proposal or something can cause people to run for select boards, get on planning commissions, and become much more engaged. And so we really have become an organization about building community. And so getting back to the energy issue, we want to see solar projects that are community solar, where people come together, because that's really what Vermonters want, is they want renewable energy that supports their community.
Bennington area, I don't know much about it, but Pownell has solar panels down there where the old track was, I think. And again, I haven't followed too much Bennington. We've got a proposal, or we've got some solar up on one of the sites.
They're talking about it.
Yeah,
Yep.
But
I
it-
wish that would happen.
Well, but again, we have what I will call the plunk it down model. We have out-of-state companies coming in and plunking down a project. That's, it's moving the markets. But really what we want to see is we want to see the people of Bennington coming together to identify the sites that you want to see it and that you don't want to see it. So through your town plan, through your planning
We've
process.
done that pretty good, but I think what we don't have in Bennington anyway, maybe throughout the state, we don't have enough people that have the money, or we don't create enough money to be able to invest in ourselves. We're always looking in Bennington for grants or subsidies or some free money. And I don't think long term we've done ourselves well that way, because in the school system, they got a grant 3 or 4 years ago that I was at a meeting, and the business manager said, don't take it. And I was with him. I said, don't take it. He says, why? It's going to go away. In 3 to 4 years, your 3 or 4 million programs you started with that money is going to go away. You're not going to have the money to fund it. Sure as heck, what happens? The grants went away, the arrow money or whatever it's called went away. We now had 2 budgets turned down. We have to live within our means, but we have to create more means. And we're not doing that here.
I think just looking at energy, as Annette's talking about, one of the greatest ways to do that is actually, it's an ownership question. It's not necessarily
Right.
how you build the project. There's many models internationally for communities actually owning their energy projects. So just
Solar you're talking about?
yeah,
or-
solar, and
And
other
wind.
technologies.
Germany
and
has
wind.
done well with community wind.
And so you look at these other models and where community ownership of these renewable projects is high. We don't have that in Vermont. There's very few, if any, community ownership projects. We do have a law that allows for community group net metering, meaning that if you build a project that multiple owners have a slice of, they can get the output of that to their meter. So they can get a credit for it on their utility bill. So the law's in place to do that. What's not in place to do that is the way to actually, the legal structure to get it done. So it's very, very difficult to figure out how to get the investment money in one place under one entity.
Somebody here
to have
just did
those
that
people
with
come over.
hydro, tried to do it, or has done it with hydro over one of the rivers, and I don't know the details of it. but the hoops and the time it took to get that to go through
Very difficult.
was foolish, and I just think that you've got to cut some of those barriers down. I mean, I
Yep.
like Act 250, but what I just went through with Walmart, it was like Act 250 just killed themselves because they should have given those people that delayed it party status in the beginning. Me and you were part of that when they wouldn't give us party status, not at Walmart, but something else. And to me, it's like Act 250 got to be revamped, make it work where it's supposed to work, and not block people out, let them voice their opinion. But we can't use Act 250 to block projects just because somebody doesn't want them, whether it's solar, whether it's hydro.
Well, we kind of wish Act 250 was a part of citing solar, because we think it actually is very appropriate.
It would help it, do you think?
Oh,
Yeah.
look, these renewable projects have regional impacts, and so the region is the area to look at them. Act 250 as a process is far more accessible. I was relating to a lawyer the other day who has only done Act 250 work, who, it turned out, to my surprise, wasn't familiar with the Public Service Board process. So I started explaining it, and I said, do you realize that you have to file to be an intervener, and then you get 3 rounds of discovery, and you have to put in pre-filed testimony, and then there's rebuttal testimony, and there's surrebuttal testimony, and then there's this very odd technical hearing, because then the lawyer said, well, what happens at the hearing? And I said, well, usually it's the lawyers trying to get a question answered that will inform their brief, or they're trying to destroy the credibility of the witness. But you never hear any real substantive discussion, because it's this incredibly rigorous process that is not done in any other court in the state. And we've had the Citing Commission meeting to look at the issues around the process, and they never even discussed the really bizarre Public Service Board process, which appears to be set up entirely to enrich lawyers and discourage public participation.
You say it's rigorous, but at the same time it ignores a lot of the issues.
It's ridiculous.
So it's this amazingly broken process where I agree with you, Mike. I don't think any one person should be able to stop a project, but the process should help that person as well as the developer come to some agreement or means that is good for the community, good for the person, and good for the developer.
I meant more on a.
And the PSB process just failed.
Right. I meant more
outright.
on a commercial spot that wants to be in the town that,
Right.
that the town has allowed, or it's been there and wants to expand a bit.
Well, and one of the issues was that the judge denied standing for the group of residents who wanted to intervene, whether or not they wanted to intervene to
No,
oppose it or whatever.
Act 250 did it, and then the
judge said
you had
they
the
have
right to, and so they could have started de novo
But
all over again.
that had
But Act
dragged it
250
out.
shouldn't have. They should have said no. You have party status, and I was surprised that
yeah.
they turned them down.
Well, Act 250 has become more and more hostile to citizen participation, and so you're right. It does need to be revamped, and it needs. I think the court, environmental court, is not friendly either. I've done some cases there, and it's again.
I guess what I'm trying to say is, looking at the film we just showed with all of those wind towers, how somebody could put those things up, but my little thing of an addition on a Walmart here in Bennington probably got more scrutiny than those.
Act 250 would never have.
And your addition probably created real jobs. I'm guessing
Taxes,
jobs, taxes,
revenue for the town. Yep. And I was surprised when you showed that film, because I didn't see that film before we did this show. And I always said originally, well, you have one town, who cares? But then you see them all together and you say, who the hell wants to look at them all the time? And when you first showed them, it looks like, to me, now, again, I'm not overly religious or superstitious, but it looked like there was a whole bunch of people being crucified up there when you showed the still photo of it. And I'm sitting there going, where's the beauty in that? And I can just see Mount Anthony up here. If they wanted to put them on Mount Anthony, I bet you 90% of the town would say no.
It actually does have a targeted wind resource on Mount Anthony. However, it's also conserved, so it probably wouldn't happen. But when we've been looking around the state at the areas where wind could happen, yes, there are very.
Wasn't Aikens conserved?
Well, the George D. Aiken Wilderness, they're not proposing. This is the Forest Service's argument. They're not proposing to put the turbines in the wilderness, and so they're saying that look, it's not in the wilderness. So we're saying
it's just outside the wilderness.
It's a mile and a half outside the wilderness, and it's going to impact the wilderness, and you've underestimated the impacts to the wilderness. And the Forest Service's obligation through the management plan for the George D. Aiken Wilderness and through Congress's, the way the Wilderness Act was created, requires the Forest Service to manage its lands to enhance the wilderness, not degrade it. and so all of these are arguments that we've made to the
Well, going
Forest
back to,
Service.
again,
Yeah.
we're switching back and forth here, folks, but they're all interconnected. Going back
is,
to the
yeah.
political part of this, then the people of this state have to examine, when someone comes up again, what he's promoted for these things, and should they look for somebody else? I mean, to be quite honest with you, because I don't think these things are good for, now, is these things going to keep going and growing? Are they got more proposals of these?
Well, right now we have 3, and the Deerfield Wind Project is the one most likely to succeed unless the court case.
And how many is that going to be, do you know? How many?
That one would be 15 turbines, 7 on one ridge line and 8 on the other ridge line, each 2 megawatts. So it would be a 30 megawatt project in an area that we don't even know if it can get to the grid. I mean, we learned, I went to a transmission planning workshop a couple weeks ago, and the Velco engineers said in response to the need to put in this $10 million synchronous converter for Lowell because it's not getting to the grid, that they really were surprised by the curtailment issues in the Northeast Kingdom. They really didn't expect it. And so to even take anybody's word for what they're going to produce or how much power is going to get out, we have real serious issues. If we are even going to consider doing more of this, we better get a handle on how to do it right, because right now we've seen it done so wrong.
Well, I'm going to try to wrap this up now. We've got a few minutes left. So, Annette, thank you. You're from Vermonters for a Clean Environment. Luke, I'd like you to say a little bit of closing thing if you can.
Yeah, and he's got some pictures maybe they can get
Oh,
put
yeah,
up.
I don't know if they came up, but yep, Luke Snelling from Energize Vermont, and we have a Power Up program. It's a solar zero net cost program for homeowners. They can go to powerupvt.com, powerupvt.com, fill out a form there, and we'll call you back and we'll figure out a solar system that works great for your home.
And there it is right there. And when we're taping this, so I'll ask Dan to put in anything that we didn't, that we want to play over to fill out it. There's a nice shot there. I think
So
that's
these are shots of projects that members of the commercial team that we're working with for these projects has done, and you can see that these are nice projects. You know, you can
Yeah, they're
still have
very
a
nice.
very
Yeah.
scenic, beautiful home.
looks better than a windmill.
Right, and these are Vermont projects, and
See the stuff at the
that's it.
top, that's hot water.
yep, that's hot water at the top there, and around the edges is PV for electricity.
And solar hot water has a very quick payback compared to photovoltaics for electricity. So, and that really is a fossil fuel savings right there.
Right.
People really need to spend money on their solar hot
Well,
water.
we're going to be doing more shows. Annette and I are going to be doing more shows. She's going to be my co-host on Bennington Tonight Show. And Luke, I hope you come back
Great, thank you.
on this subject or anything else you want, and encourage more young people to come down and tell us about what's going on in the state. I don't know when our next show is going to be. I don't know what it's going to be about. We're just starting this and getting it back in play. I want to hit on some good subjects that I feel strongly about, and Annette feels strongly about. And you can even be a co-host if you want to come down here,
Great.
because we can
I
ship these
appreciate
things
that.
all over now.
Excellent.
And so I want to thank you both for coming
Thank you,
down.
Mike, for having
Thank
us.
you for having us.
We'll do this again, and thanks for the audience, and thanks for Dan May, our director in there. So we'll see you again on Bennington Tonight Show. Thank you.